Let's get sweaty.
Hey guys, welcome to another Shenmue Dojo video. Today I actually wanted to take the time to do a response video to one of the videos I did previously. So last week you'd have seen the video around whether Shenmue 4 could go down the episodic route, so breaking down the remaining chapters essentially into episodes per game. So I think there's like 5, maybe 6 chapters left, doing those and seeing how that may play out. So I did a video for and against it. I've been saying in a few videos I'll pick some comments up and pick up on them and talk them through in a separate video. I felt, given the strength of response, I thought this was a really good video to experiment with it and see how things go. Now, a couple of little disclaimers. Obviously, any maths that I do is being done off the top of my head. It's being done really, really quickly, so the numbers may not add up, but I'm trying to make a rough point. Also, I'm going to make this very clear from the offset that if I was presented with 2 options, which is essentially episodic or full game, I'd always want the full game. There's no comparison for that. But what I'm looking at here is essentially an alternative that might get the Shenmue train continuing to roll, if that makes sense. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick up the comments on YouTube, go through most of them, and sort of respond to them in kind. I will pull up some little articles here or there to reference some points that have been made in some of the comments as well, just for a bit of context or where I'm getting my information from. So without further ado, let's pull up the comments. I can work from the bottom all the way to the top. And as I say, I'm not like picking anybody out to have a pop or anything like that. I'm just going to go through the comments and see how we go. So our first person, I'm just going to call you Book because it's a massively long username. Obviously doesn't like the idea very much, and that's obviously their prerogative. The way I see this thing is essentially that at the moment we haven't got, as far as I'm aware at least, an investor coming in with anything in excess of $15 to $20 million, and we know Shenmue 3 costs $20 million to make Shenmue 4. So what I'm arguing here is essentially this idea could be a way of pulling it through with a smaller initial outlay and then hopefully start funding future installments. Now, there are obviously some caveats to that, in that you'd have to think about pricing for this thing, how much cut a store would take, the publisher, if there was one, and I personally think WiseNet could possibly publish this themselves, which might help mitigate some of that. So there's all these other factors to take into account. But essentially what I'm arguing with, especially with this first point, essentially is quite simply, do we have anybody at the moment who's willing to fund Shenmue 4 upfront at a $20 million base? That's the question, and at the moment I don't think we do. And it's probably also worth me mentioning that I personally think the 110 Industries rumours are completely dead in the water at this point. I hope I'm wrong, but that's just my opinion on that. So if that's not going to happen, we need to potentially look at other ways of getting this thing made. Hopefully what I'm saying doesn't happen and we get Shenmue 4, Shenmue 5, and it'd be great. But this is just an idea, essentially. So let's move this forward a little bit here. So Hazuki Hedgehog said it's a compromise of quality, and we might wish it didn't release at all. Want to be able to explore previous areas with inventory, backtracks, collectibles, and side content. I get that point around the side content, backtracking with your inventory, New Game Plus, etc. I guess in terms of compromise of quality, I'm not too sure where that would necessarily come from. I think if they had enough of a budget, but a smaller budget, but honed that in based off the Shenmue 3 engine, improved upon it, and just really sort of focused in on that story content, I don't think we'd lose too much quality, if any. As long as the gameplay quality is at least of Shenmue 3's standard, if not better, I think we would be okay, as long as the story content was of a Shenmue 2 level at least. And that's the big thing here, and I keep saying this about Shenmue 4. It has to have a killer story, be it episodic, be it a full game. It has to have a killer story. If it doesn't, we are buggered, finished, done. That will be it. I promise you, that will be it. Shenmue 4 story has to be on a Shenmue 2 level of storytelling and what it moves us on to. So from a gameplay perspective, I don't think quality content would necessarily be compromised because they've got the base systems there already. They're not having to spend 70% of their time building that engine. They can improve upon it, nail the story, and hopefully, be it episodic or otherwise, not lose any quality here. They should improve upon it. And normally sequels are better than their predecessors. There are some exceptions to the rules, but I would expect Shenmue 4 to be better than Shenmue 3. Very much so that I'm going to be controversial here, and that Shenmue 2 is a better game than Shenmue 1. Moving on, the next person, and this is where I've got an article coming up, TR Gaming 4468 talks about doing Shenmue 3 and potentially any other sort of future installments in the original Dreamcast engines. Now, quite frankly, while that would have been really cool, from a cost perspective, it would be absolute insanity, because you've got to license the engine from Sega, you've got to train people to use it. It's just not going to work. And then when you think of D3T and the issues they had with the ports for the 2018 re-releases, it just eats budget really, really quickly. And Cedric Biscay talked about this in 2016 on Gameblog. And actually, guys, read this interview. It's actually a really cool interview. He talks a little bit about the Kickstarter and potential publishers. This is from 2016. So anyway, he talks about the Shenmue Saturn bit as being a bonus. And he's saying that, yeah, obviously Shenmue 3 on Dreamcast would be cool, but it's complicated. For the Dreamcast tech, you need the rights to do it, and it's complex and everything else. It's really hard to set up. And then he talks about here, essentially saying, look, while he'd like to do it, a Dreamcast version or engine version, he doesn't think would sell and would need to be sold at a ridiculous price, and therefore isn't really going to be viable from a business perspective. So that's sort of why they didn't do that. And hopefully I can put that to rest a little bit, because I know this has been floating around the community quite a while. It quite simply was cost prohibitive and much, much cheaper to use Unreal. Now, had they already secured the licenses and everything else, it may have been doable. But at the costs that I think were being touted, and I don't know if it was explored or not, it just didn't seem like it would work. So that's why it hasn't gone down that route. Sean Kinai, I hope I pronounced that correctly, doesn't want the episodic thing to happen, and feels we'd lose too much from the experience if Shenmue was to become an episodic story game. Some of them do fall off hard. I think that, yeah, some of that is obviously personal opinion, but also some get cancelled and unfinished, which is actually something I do talk about in the video itself. So I can understand that side of it, and it's definitely a risk. I think, like, in terms of it being massive continuation of the story, being broken up in small episodes, whereas the rest of the series was full games, I can get that. I can get that idea. My point being as well is Shenmue has natural transition points. So from Shenmue 1 to Shenmue 2, bearing in mind Shenmue 1 is one chapter anyway, so it's already sort of episodic, but obviously a much bigger game. That's a transition point. It's there. Obviously Shenmue 2 condenses in chapters 3, 4 and 5. And then you're into Shenmue 3, which does sort of 5 and 6, essentially. So you've got 5 chapters left. So you do hit your natural transitions points. You leave Bailu Village, you go to Niao. You leave Niao, you end up on the Great Wall. Shenmue 2, you leave Hong Kong, go to Kowloon. Kowloon to Guilin. So they do have those points there. And I'm going to pick that up a little bit with a future comment further up, because I don't want to leave this one too much. What I would say is, though, you're not going to lose any gameplay elements, because theoretically they should just build this off the Shenmue 3 engine. So at the bare minimum, you should have the gameplay elements from Shenmue 3. Take out the stamina system, for the love of God. Don't get me wrong, I don't like that at all. But you should have the basis there to keep relatively similar gameplay for a Shenmue 4 and potentially 5 as well. Hodgie Fitness 6058 talks a little bit about being episodic and it's sort of jumping around. I think it sort of comes on to the point I've just made, that Shenmue has lots of natural transition points anyway, natural conclusions when you leave areas. You wouldn't necessarily need to jump around, because once you've sort of finished that area, you don't go back anyway. In Shenmue, you don't go back to Japan, or certainly don't at the moment. When you leave Wanchai, you don't go back. When you're in Kowloon, and when you're in Guilin, you don't go back. So that jumping around, I don't think is going to happen necessarily. It's certainly not, from the history of the games so far, the way it's going to go. I expect with a Shenmue 4, episodic or not, you will end up in this road of essentially having new locations and not going back to the old ones. So then, Blair4115 just says it's all an episodic game. I take the point in that it is, because you're needing multiple games to finish a whole story section. But Shenmue 1 obviously only covers the one chapter. The other games cover multiple. So you can still break it down further. I take the point, though, that it is already sort of episodic, because you obviously need multiple games to finish this thing. And Yu Suzuki has talked about at least having 4 games, if not potentially 5, to get this thing finished. So I absolutely see the point. Tech Game, I'm just going to call you that because it's a massively long name, talks about having Shenmue 3 DLC to like push things on a little bit, and then move on to Shenmue 4 as essentially the final game, which I have done a video on that separately. I'll link it in the description below, so if you haven't seen that, have a look at that one. I won't cover too many points on that because I've already done it. I do see what he's saying around, or they're saying rather, around giving the public one last reason to support it. The Shenmue 3 DLC is a tricky one. Essentially, Deep Silver, whoever they are now, and I don't know, there's been lots of changes at THQ and Embracer and all of that. So that, I think Deep Silver don't technically exist anymore. They've been amalgamated into something else, and they've had lots of layoffs and things there. So I don't think this would happen anyway. But it would require somebody from Embracer Group to essentially give permission around extra Shenmue 3 content. There might have to be some fees involved for that. They may want to invest in it or not. I doubt it. But given the time lag that's happened from a Shenmue 3 now, I think a DLC is probably too late. And I don't think from a viability perspective for the publisher who were involved at the time, I don't think it's a goer. In terms of Shenmue 4 being the last game, now, there is a division of crowd. I've done a video on it. If it didn't compromise story content and they could do it and do it well, I would not be against it. Because actually that point of finally finishing the Shenmue series, I think that would be a selling point for lots of people. And I think people would get on board with it. What I wouldn't want them to do is essentially rush it. If they're going to rush it in Shenmue 4, you're going to end up screwing yourself, possibly even harder. And then you really put the risk of 5 and what could happen there. It could well be on the line as well. So if they could do it well without losing too much story content, I'm all for it. But personally, my view is if you're not going to do Shenmue 4 properly and it's just going to be a rushed mess, I'd rather not have a Shenmue 4. I'd rather have it done the way they want to do it. Now, that's just a selfish point of view. I know there's plenty of people out there who would want to see Shenmue 4 finish it, and I completely understand where you guys are coming from. I get it, I understand it, and I'm not against it, but I just would want it done well, and I'd rather they were able to follow their true vision rather than sort of giving up and rushing things and potentially leaving a bitter taste. That's what I'm getting at essentially here. Moving up a bit further, Captain Morgan 5807 talks about episodic games having a boom period and not really a thing now. I get that. I can understand that point completely, which is one of the risk factors I think an episodic Shenmue 4 may have, because episodic games have sort of fallen away a little bit by the wayside, so completely get that point. Moving up, Ranners talks about wanting a full game, and as I said sort of at the top of this video, the issue is whether there's the cash up front to do a full game from Wisenet publishers or whatever. It's a big risk here, because when I talk about Shenmue sales, they average around 400 to 500,000 sales between all the mainline releases. Now, bearing in mind that's a big drop off from Shenmue 1 when that released at 1.2 million sales, dropping all the way off to 500,000. And that's me being sort of really sort of positive about that. It's really difficult to see how they could make that work with the fan base size that we are. It was described as a core niche product, which is why having episodic might be a safer route to go if you can make it work, if you can get merch, if you can get like physicals, complete editions, limited run editions, those sorts of things. You can make it work, but that's sort of where I'm going with that side of things, and I do think we'd buy it. I do like the Battle Rally idea, and maybe some mini games or DLC games that might work or be added on as like a cheap like £5-10 add-on potentially, but they'd have to be unique and cool. And I do think what Wisenet are doing, I mean this is just me guessing, so games like Air Twist, which is obviously now going multi-platform, hopefully that can start putting money towards Shenmue 4. So guys, if you haven't ordered Air Twister, you're not thinking about it, just think as well in your heads it could help fund a Shenmue game. So that's always worth sort of keeping in your mind as well. Going up, Whispered Mr. S8516. He's saying, or they're saying rather, I keep saying here, I don't know why, apologies. They're saying that they'd want more from the developers with the smaller chunks and a higher quality output, which is absolutely something I agree with. Would definitely want better storytelling. Again, completely agree with it. And it's then sort of talking about whether it will work or not, and I think it can work. It just has to smash the story content. And actually, I do agree what they're saying here. Yeah, modern gaming is about getting to the experience or to the end point quicker. Shenmue doesn't lend itself well to that, and Yu Suzuki has obviously talked about in several interviews around modernising Shenmue 4 that he'd like people to access the story faster and nail that down, and hopefully sort of almost split it so you have like a really heavily story focused mode, but then also potentially a mode for us old school fans. So I'd have like a modern mode and what I'd call a Shenmue mode within Shenmue 4. That would be my ideal. So I completely get where they're coming from here. Sonic Shenmue talks about, it's an interesting thought due to Shenmue obviously being segmented as it is. And this sort of comes into maybe losing some of the transitional impact that Shenmue games have, especially Shenmue 2 and even Shenmue 3 actually, when you leave Bailut and Yaowu. The transitions there are so well done. They're almost different experiences within the game, and it's very, very brave to do it. And one of the biggest elements of that is the change from Kowloon to Guilin, when you go from the rooftop over to the sort of the peaceful walk through Guilin. So I get that potential could be lost, and that night and day thing within the game could be lost. So I see where you're coming from now. I get it. I absolutely get it. As I say, it then comes down to whether they can make it work from a budgetary standpoint. Overjump Rally talks a little bit about the chapters and the original plan around sort of how they were going to be released and the cost of printed discs, etc. I must say, I don't think Shenmue Kiwami is ever going to happen. That's just my opinion. I just don't think at this point they'll go backwards unless they can really justify it. But the point here around having the separate chapters, you know, working it out as a cost of a full game and then dividing it up and then making full copies is essentially what I've mooted and talked about in the video that I did already. So I broadly agree with this. I just don't think Kiwami's happen. I wouldn't be against it, and if they could do it and do it well, and it lends into getting Shenmue 4, Shenmue 5, fine, but you run a massive risk. If that's not successful, we are screwed. Whereas, at least with Shenmue 4, you can finish it, and then go back if you needed to. And then the last point is from Petar, and talks a little bit about what they think it will make Shenmue more successful financially. But it won't make it successful among the masses. I agree. I mean, Shenmue, let's be honest, probably isn't going to be at this point unless they did a full reboot and modernised it to the point where it may lose the Shenmue soul, and I don't want it to do that. But the idea, as I say, of this video is essentially to make the point around some of these comments and how I think it can be done with a smaller upfront risk, essentially. And that's essentially what Petar is saying here with the comment there. So I've been through all of them. As I say, it's just an interesting topic, and it's quite a divisive topic from sort of talking to people on the forums, on the Discord, and how that may or may not play out. And I'm always interested to hear, guys, what you think around something like this. Can it work as episodic? What are the risks? What are the benefits? And is this a good idea? Does it mean we can consistently get new Shenmue games potentially every year up to the end? Possibly. Does it lend itself well enough to fund other chapters? And also, is Yu Suzuki, with all the best respect in the world, he is in his 60s now. Is this a quicker way of getting to the end rather than sort of having a massive, like two potentially massive development cycles, and then finishing things, and may run the risk of things not getting finished? I don't know. As I said, there is an argument out there, and I've done the video previously around Shenmue 4 potentially finishing everything. So to sort of round off, as I say, the whole episodic thing is an idea. It's just something that might get us more Shenmue games, considering at the moment we are not in a position that I am aware of, that anybody is aware of, that a publisher is willing to front up a significant chunk of money to get a full Shenmue 4 made, hence the idea of episodic. Now, WiseNet could easily be quietly working behind the scenes. They could have money saved up with Air Twister coming out. That could be a rip-roaring success, and that could then potentially go into other projects like a Shenmue 4. But we don't know at this point, and I would be very much encouraging of WiseNet if they could front up as much of it as they could themselves. It then makes it more desirable to a publisher if they're coming in and say funding, say, like, I don't know, 30% of it rather than 50-60% of development costs. All of a sudden, that initial outlay becomes a lot less. So if you do it through episodic, that drops that risk again. So like I say, there's arguments for and against this thing, and I'm just really interested in how this topic may or may not play out. As I say, it's just an idea. The developers probably won't even pick up on it. They probably don't care. But it's just something within the community I think is a really, really good discussion point. But for now, guys, thank you for dropping in on this video and letting me read your comments out. Thank you for commenting on this to allow me to do this video. There'll be plenty more Shenmue content coming out over the next few weeks. But for now, guys, take care, have a good one, and I'll see you soon.